Well, we're wrapping up this morning, if you can believe it. Wrapping up in the book of Exodus. God's at War is coming to its inevitable conclusion this morning. And kind of leaving the book of Exodus in the rearview mirror. We've spent most of the fall here, both in church and in Sunday school. So in Sunday school this morning, I think most of you are here, but we started in the Christmas story today, and we're going to continue on that through early January, and then we'll head back to the Old Testament, but we're going to land in the book of Numbers, and so we're going to pick up there. And this is our last week here in Exodus. Next week, we're going to start a Christmas series in church as well called, Behold His Glory. Had to stop and think my way through there. Behold His Glory. John 1 in verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory, full of grace and truth. And that's really, we're going to camp in that one verse through the Christmas season. And looking forward to that. So we're going to wrap up here today. Have you seen the previews yet? Do you know what I'm talking about? Exodus, Gods and Kings, starring Christian Bale. You could also think of that as, Batman Saves the People. And actually, I say that, but did you watch the previews? Pharaoh's running around in white and gold, and what is Christian Bale running around in but black and silver? I'm thinking the visual element of Batman Saves the People. I don't know if they did it on purpose or not, but that's the first thing I thought when I saw it. Like, oh, Batman is Moses. So, yeah, exactly. I can't do it that well, so I wasn't going to go there. We'll let Pastor Carl do his Batman impersonations later. But yeah, so it has that kind of visual element to it. As I've watched the trailers, and I watched it again this morning, as I watch it, it definitely has that sense, at least to me, a couple things that I sense. First of all, that any similarity between what we have studied for the last several months and the movie and, say, the biblical text are bound to be somewhat coincidental. It seems like they got the broad strokes right, but the details, I think, are going to make the story in the movie somewhat unrecognizable to those of us who've spent some time looking at the story in the Bible. That's just my instincts, especially after Noah, which was such a wonderful discussion of the biblical text and was so true and accurate to, the way we would interpret that. So I'm hesitant, honestly, to really look for Exodus and Gods and Kings to be a biblically accurate movie. I'm already just kind of bracing myself for what is to come because it seems a little human-centric and it seems to miss the whole divine element there. Certainly nothing that we've talked a lot about here. So we'll see what happens, I guess. I haven't seen it. I'm not really making plans to see it. But throw it out there that it's there. If you do see it, let me know what you think. I'm very curious. I eventually will see it. But paying good money to go see a bad movie is just not smart. So, leave that one there. But as we look at back in the book of Exodus, we're going to be in Exodus chapter 14 this morning, if I didn't mention that. As we go back to this, really there has been two central questions that have driven the plagues narratives, that have driven this whole section of Scripture, and hopefully that as I've repeated them, you will either remember them or as I say them, you'll go, oh yeah, now I remember them. The two central questions that have really driven this whole study is the question, first of all, who is the Lord of the people? Because that was a really big contention between God and Pharaoh. Moses walked into Pharaoh's court and he says, God said, let my people go. God asserted lordship over the Jewish people right from the outset. And Pharaoh's response, of course, set up the rest of this by way of answer because Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey him? And God said, well, let me introduce myself. Here's my card. And my other card. And my other card. And so it was really a great introduction, a great answer to that question, who is the Lord of the people? And that was something that is very much in play. Who is actually going to be Lord? And the second question that is driven through this, although it's kind of an undercurrent, is who are the people of the Lord? Once you establish who the Lord is and who you're going to worship, serve, and follow, the question is, who are the people who are actually going to recognize that? There were, within Israel, the Jewish people, there were people who were really convinced that Pharaoh was the Lord and they were the people of Pharaoh. That's just where they were, and we're going to see that even to a degree today. And certainly the Egyptians believed that Pharaoh was the Lord, and they were the Lord. They were the people of Pharaoh. But God wanted to know who were the people that thought he was the Lord. The Jewish people, by and large, that was they were people that were picked out, that were chosen by him, that were called after his name, that he rightfully anticipated would recognize him as Lord, and most of them did. And so those are the two questions, though, that have really driven this whole study through the book of Exodus. As we look into this text this morning, we're also going to see something about how to approach obstacles in our life. And I mention this up front because I want you to have that kind of running in the back of your mind as an awareness of how do we approach the obstacles in our life. I don't want to make this just by way of application as a surprise. I really want us to kind of see this and think this in the back of our mind as we read through the entirety of chapter 14 to see, here's an obstacle. How do we deal with it? How do we handle it? How do we trust God to handle the obstacles that are in our life? And this is a particularly important element to us because we periodically feel like obstacles in our life. You ever felt that? You ever felt like there's just something big there that's in the way? Something big there that's stopping whatever else should be there? Something that's preventing you from doing what you want, going where you want, having what you want, doing what you need to do. Something in your life that is just blocking you, hindering you from being or having what you could or should. And so how do we handle that when we feel penned in? And we're going to see the Israelites face just that circumstance. But the reality is, if we are the people of the Lord and that we have been following his lead and will continue to follow his lead, we will see our obstacles eventually as opportunities for God to work. That takes a kind of a shift in our own mindset to say, I'm going to see this thing that I'm really tempted to complain about, because that's our first instinct, isn't it? This thing that is blocking me, this thing that is an obstacle, I'm going to choose to see this as an opportunity to see God work. That is a huge shift in our mindset. But if we will follow the Lord, and if we will continue to follow the Lord, that is a mindset that we will get to. That obstacles really become an opportunity for God to work. So let's begin in Exodus chapter 14. I actually do want to read through the whole chapter, so I'll try to keep God's words to a maximum and mine to a minimum. We'll see what happens. That sometimes works. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say to the children of Israel, They are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. Now, for the moment, I just want us to stop and see. I don't want to spend too much time on the where here, but for the moment, I want us to simply notice who it was that told Moses and the Israelites where to camp. I mean, you think about it, we have place names. We don't necessarily know off the top of your head where these things are, but we have very specific place names. God was incredibly specific about where the Israelites were to make camp. And so as we continue reading in chapter 14, understand that God intentionally put the Israelites where they were. They were penned in by the Red Sea and the wilderness and soon to be Pharaoh's army. They seemed to be painted into a corner. God painted them into that corner intentionally. And it's important for us to see that because the Israelites are going to see an obstacle that God put there on purpose. And so when we think about this whole idea of obstacles and difficulties in our life, understand sometimes it's God's doing. And so that is definitely the case here. And again, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. We see this again, and I want to keep mentioning it because the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. How did the Lord harden Pharaoh's heart? He took the children of Israel out. They were suddenly gone from Egypt. Can you imagine Pharaoh waking up in the morning and looking out on his construction projects? These were his legacy in stone and mortar that were all of a sudden not going anywhere because the workforce that was building them was gone. Here's a legacy: the Pharaoh who built half a temple, the Pharaoh who built half of a pyramid. That's great. It's pre-ruined. It's like trend-setting. You're centuries ahead of your time, literally. That's the idea there. So he's looking out upon his legacy, and it's not going anywhere because the workforce is going, and all of a sudden it hits him. What in the world did I do? I don't care about their God. I don't care about anything. I care about their hands and their feet that are supposed to be working on my stuff and aren't. And so again, just God providing Pharaoh with the opportunity. Now, he could have said, this is the hand of God and moved on. He didn't. And so we see that his heart being hardened again by the construction projects, in this case, that were unmanned and stopped. They were just quiet. Verse 5, now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? You can see Pharaoh, who's going to make bricks now? Who's going to finish the work now? What did we do? What were we thinking? So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also, he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi-haroth before Baal-zephon. So the Israelites are camping and the Egyptians are charging. It's not hard to imagine they caught up pretty quickly. In verse 10, and when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. If you've just left, you're a newly freed slave, and you're in the desert here, and you're camping, and you're celebrating your freedom, and all of a sudden, they're back, and it's the army, not just the taskmasters. You'd be afraid too. Regardless of how many people there are, 600,000 men, 2.5 million people, if you take the low number, there's still 2.5 million slaves. These are people who knew how to swing hammers, not swords. These were people who knew how to make straw, not war. And so you have what is arguably the most powerful army in its day, with the most technological advances of the military in its day in the chariot, and they are charging after the Hebrew people. Fear is not an unnatural thing at this point. It would be like sitting here at church and the collective might of the U.S. Army rolled up onto the front yard. Without a parade announcement, we'd be a little scared. That's what happened. And so they cried out to the Lord. Verse 11, then they said to Moses, and this is where it gets interesting. Then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt so with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. Moses, we told you this was going to happen, that there was no graves in Egypt. Now, what are the odds that there were really no graves in Egypt? What are the odds that the construction platforms they worked on were securely built? What are the odds that they had long life expectancies with the heavy burden they were expected to carry every day? What are the odds that they were well fed and well watered and well cared for? What are the odds? Isn't it a little more likely that Pharaoh says, wow, there's a couple million of them around here. They're pretty expendable. And probably treated them like that. Probably beat them to the place where they cried out to God for freedom. They weren't praying, God, leave us here for another 400 years that we can be slaves. They were praying for freedom. But as soon as they get freedom and they're out here and they see the Egyptian army, they're like, oh, great, we weren't dying in Egypt, which they were, and so you brought us out into the wilderness to kill us, which makes a total amount of sense, doesn't it? You think about all the things that God had to do to spring them from their Egyptian prison. I mean, there's a little bit of effort from a divine perspective to throw around the things that he had done. He defeated their entire pantheon. I don't think he broke a sweat, but it's just there. He did definitely do some things that were miraculous, that took, effort, energy on his part that he didn't normally do. And they're like, oh, great, you did all that to bring us out to the desert to kill us. Does that make any sense at all? Because what's going to happen to people just naturally? You live, and then you die. Does God have to do anything for that to happen? No, it's kind of happening anyway, right? From the day you're born, you start dying. You get a bigger body, but you're heading for the grave. That's just the inevitable march of life. What are the odds that God would go to such great lengths to bring them out in the desert so they could die there? Does that make any sense to you? Does that seem logical at all? No, it's not. We know that looking back on it. Granted, we're not sitting in the middle of the Egyptian desert. Day like today, you might wish we were, and we're not looking at the Egyptian army bearing down on us. I guess it's instructive when you think about the complaining that we do. Does it always make sense? I know that's getting into meddling, but it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. God had literally, though, put the Israelites right here. And the Israelites did exactly what any normal, rational person would do. They immediately began complaining. Because that's what we do. Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." That hold your peace is just a really nice way of shut up. God's going to fight for you. God is going to win the victory for you. These Egyptians that you're whining about right now, God's getting ready to kill them all. You'll never see them again. Now shut up. It's kind of the idea. It's said nicer than that. But you will hold your peace. And these are very brave and bracing words that Moses has for his people. And this is what you would expect of a leader who is leading the people, that he would say, no, God has delivered us. God has brought us up out of Egypt. God has put us in this exact location, in this exact moment. God will take care of it. That's what you expect Moses to say. And then you get into verse 15. And the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward." Now, that wasn't a message that God had for the people of Israel. That was a message that God had for Moses personally. Why do you cry to me? Because on the one hand, Moses addresses the people. He sees the army. He sees their fear. And he addresses the people. Be brave. Be courageous. Have faith. Trust God. God's going to take everything. And then you know what he does? He steps out of the limelight, goes back to his tent, and he falls on his face and he begins praying to God. God, you've got to do something or we're all toast, literally. They're not coming to capture, they're coming to kill. God, if you don't do something, and what you see in this moment, and it's just a crack into the person of Moses, like any leader in public where you're encouraging people, you've got to trust God, you have to have faith. In private, he gets in there, and in the prayer of the moment, there is some weakness. There is that tension between faith and fear. The faith that says, God, I know you're going to do something, but if you don't, we are so dead. And you see this a little bit of pulling here in Moses, even as a leader. This tension between faith and fear that we all have. I wish that I could stand up before you and say, I don't understand this. I wish I could say, I don't get this. I don't know why Moses would be upset. But I understand it really well. That tension of standing up in front of people as I do week after week. Trust God, have faith, be courageous, because we should. There are days that when I am talking to God, you can almost feel God saying, just stop. I hear your faith and I hear your fear, and I don't like the fear part. But it's a normal reaction. It's a normal part of our lives. It's a normal tension that we each face. It's part of our humanity. It's part of our flawedness. It's part of our fallenness. I look forward to the day when I stand before him face to face and that fear element drops away, along with the sin element and all the other parts of me I don't like. And that there is no more tension. It's resolved because I am there. And faith becomes sight. But in this life, you ever get to the place where you feel like, I trust God, but I still have fear. You feel like Jairus' father there in the New Testament. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. That tension between faith and fear that we manage but can never fully resolve. Even Moses, as faith-filled a man as he was still a man and still wrestled with that tension in his life. And so God says to Moses, Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel, go forward. Moses, I get your tension. Now here's what I'm going to tell you to do. Get up, dry your eyes, walk out of your tent door, and give the order to march forward. What were they looking at in front of them? Water, the Red Sea. But that was the instruction. So he says in verse 16, but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. So I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the angel of God who went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near the other all that night. And so if you can imagine the visual, God says, all right, Moses, give the command to go forward. Just go out and part the Red Sea. That whole thing. And he just states it so matter-of-factly. Just go divide the water. Like, okay, yeah, I do that every day. Unlike the cartoon that, Moses in the pool, parting the water. This was not something he did. This was something that God did for him and through him. This was not a regular event in Moses' life. He didn't sit there, at dinner table and make his drink go quick. It's just not a power that he had. This is something that God was going to do that was miraculous. And he goes, just go part the water. And then the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud that had led them to this place, not only did God tell them where to go, he led them there personally, goes from in front of the camp to behind them. Moses is going to lead them through the water. It's going to part it. There's only one way to go. It's not going to be real hard. When there's water on this side, water on this side, path here, path. Okay, it's easy to see. So God goes to the back of the parade now, and on the Egyptian side, there is this dark cloud, and on the Jewish side, there is this bright pillar of fire. So you've got light to work with here, and you've got fog over here. What time of day is it? It's nighttime. Interesting, because all the movies, it's like the middle of the day. It's nighttime. And so here's the children of Israel. They're preparing to move forward. It's nighttime walking into water. Awesome. And so God's got them lit so they can see what they're doing, and he's got fog in the background, so the Egyptians, not only is it nighttime, there's no moon, there's just fog, and it's dense and it's dark, and they have trouble doing what they're doing. And so even though they would love to attack, they can't get anywhere near the Israelites. They can't find them. Verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued them and went after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. So, the wind blows, the sea parts, the Israelites start crossing, and at some point, somehow, the Egyptians become aware of the fact that the Israelites are moving again. They knew they were right up against the sea, so they don't necessarily know how they're moving, but they know that they're moving. And so they begin to pursue, and Pharaoh, again, just commits everything he has into this campaign. Held nothing back. Everything is in. They're going after the children of Israel. They get to the Red Sea, and when they get there, look at what they find. Wow, there's water towering up over here, and there's water towering up over here, but there's a path here, and oh, looky, what I see in the path. Israelites. And so the Egyptians go right into this dry ground as well, chasing after them. Verse 24, now it came to pass in the morning watch. So here we are now, sun's just barely coming up. I mean, this is early morning now. This is, again, it's not the middle of the day like, the movies would portray it. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and the cloud. And he troubled the army of the Egyptians, and he took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Now picture this and appreciate the comedy in this. Here they are, they're marching through the Red Sea, and as much as we think that chariots go fast, they don't go fast all the time. I mean, they are drawn by horses, they are on wheels, so they do move quickly. The chariots are cavalry units. They can move fast, but if you move too far, too fast, what's behind the cavalry? The infantry, who are on foot. Can a human carrying armor run as fast as a horse? Can they run as far as a horse? If you try to run them for too long, will they be worth much when they get to the enemy? No. And so, things do progress quickly, but you have to use pacing, otherwise you're going to get your army is just going to get dead and deader. And so, here they are, they march in, and God's looking at them, and God goes, let's see, wheels now, ping, ping, ping. And you can almost see God just going, ding, ding, ding. And one by one, all of a sudden, these chariots are like, poof, and they're like sand sleds, horse-powered sledmobiles or sandmobiles. You think about it, can you drag a chariot through dirt? Not very well. I mean, especially with a 2-horsepower motor. It's just not going to move very fast in there with 2 horses trying to pull a sand sled with a couple people in it carrying armor. I mean, your tactical advantage just went kaput. I mean, the infantry is walking by you going, I hope you catch up, because this is problematic. They have no tactical advantage anymore. Things have slowed way down, and suddenly the soldiers are going, I don't think this is a good idea. It looks to me like God, who has just plagued the daylights out of us, I mean, the air campaign was brutal, that God, who has been fighting for them all along, continues to fight for them. Maybe we should go. Maybe this is an ill-fated military endeavor. Now, these are the soldiers speaking. These aren't the leaders speaking, because they keep going forward. So, and every military has always had it, you disobey a direct order in time of war, you die, kind of an idea. I mean, that's still in our military code of justice as well, has been in all militaries across the world. If you don't like your orders, you can die. Or you can carry out your orders. That's pretty much your 2 options. And so while there is murmuring in the ranks, they're still going forward because the leadership is still going forward. And the leadership is still going forward because Pharaoh is still going forward. Absolutely driven by his defiance of God that it really doesn't matter what God does, he is still going to pursue. He's not going to let these people go, even if it meant destroying his own people. But he wasn't thinking so very clearly, I don't think. Verse 26, then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots and on their horsemen. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, again, so right at dawn, when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. They were still on the way in. Here were the Israelites. They had now cleared the far bank. They were to the other side of dry land. And Moses goes, whoop, like that. And all of a sudden the waters come crashing in as the Egyptians were still on their, trying to get their way through it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. Complete run over. But the children of Israel had walked, past tense, on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on the right hand and on their left. And so the experience of these two nations could not have been any different, even though the landscape was the same. They both started into the same Red Sea that had been parted. They both saw walls of water on the left hand and the right hand. They both went into this and saw the same thing, and yet their end result was definitely different. The Israelites kind of scurried through, afraid of the Egyptian army, and yet trying to get through safety. The Egyptian army defiantly marched in, trying to catch up to the Israelites. And it didn't work out so well because the walls of water that had towered over them came crashing down. And men in armor, bearing arms, and horses dragging sand sleds don't swim so well. Especially when water is coming crashing down on you. Is water heavy? You think about it. Anybody know what, right off the top of your head how much water weighs? 8 pounds to a gallon. There's a couple of you in there like, bam, got it. Awesome. 8 pounds to a gallon. So you imagine an entire wall of water falling on you, and it would be better for you if I fell on you. And you're going, well, that would hurt. Exactly. But you can imagine thousands, millions of gallons come crashing down on the army. It's not a matter of you float away. It's a matter of squish you like a bug and then drag you away. I mean, you're dead on contact. Did you see, not that long ago, a couple weeks ago, in New York City, a guy died because a measuring tape fell on him from 50 stories up. Ouch. You know, you get hit in the head with a measuring tape from that distance, it just does damage. How much does measuring tape weigh? Yeah, I mean, not much, right? Just little. You can imagine an entire wall of water come crashing down on a person. And so on the surface, we go, oh, that's crazy. Water doesn't kill. Yeah, actually, water can do a fair amount of damage. You see the pictures of the tsunami in Japan? You remember the video footage of that? I mean, it was staggering. I watched it on YouTube, and you watch it here. And just, I mean, the water's just moving in. It's not even moving that fast, but it's just this slow moving, and everything in its wake is just carried with it. Picking up cars, taking them with them, knocking over buildings, taking them with them. It's a massive amount of damage that water can do, and did do here. And so while the Israelites were saved, the Egyptians were lost. Verse 30, so the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. The people feared the Lord, and the people believed the Lord and Moses. God made a way where none seemed to exist. All they saw was an obstacle. And God said, no, that's an opportunity for me to do something really special. And he did it in really dramatic fashion. Now, this story, it has a lot of questions that people ask. And we'll just go quickly through a couple of these. I don't really have many answers because most of them are bad questions. Sometimes people are tempted to ask the question, how? How in the world did God part the Red Sea? Well, he told us how he parted it. Did you catch it? There was a strong east wind that parted the water. Have you ever seen water blow so that it actually, or air blow so hard that it parts water? It does happen occasionally. Can you imagine trying to walk the other way through that air? If the air is blowing hard enough to part the Red Sea all the way down to its bed, what are the odds that you could walk through that torrent of air? So the question is, it's not a question we really can answer. How did God part the Red Sea? He told us how he got it apart. He didn't really tell us how he kept it apart, other than sitting there going, how is the wrong question. He doesn't really answer the how. It's a miracle. Sometimes we'll ask the question, when? When did this happen? Okay, well, we got the time of day nailed down, didn't we? Kind of right around dawn. But when in history did this happen? And the answer is we really don't know. There are a couple different timelines that have been established as to when this might have happened, but secular history is in enough instability in this period that to try to nail down when in time this actually happened is difficult to do because you think about it, who's writing most of the history during this time period? Moses is recording it, but the Egyptians, I mean, they're the main power in the land. They're the ones recording history. They're the ones going, how do we explain that? Let's just not mention it. We'll move on to the next pharaoh. We'll just turn the page. And so that's largely, turn the page is not an uncommon thing. So nailing this down historically is difficult. So it's kind of hard to answer, but it's also the wrong question. We could ask the question of where, and I have a map here of the Red Sea, even where. And we struggle with this because we're given three place names. You have that Pi-Hahiroth, and you have Migdol, and you have Baal-Zephon. You have these very specific place names that we have absolutely no idea where they are, which is just great. We do know that the word, the name Pi-Hahiroth, means mouth of the canal. We know what that means, at least. Means mouth of the canal, but where was that? We don't really know. Tradition has the crossing of the Red Sea, and you can see that red line is kind of where the traditional Exodus route is, up on the northern side of the Gulf of Suez. You figure the Red Sea has these two finger-like configurations that go up. On the left-hand side is the Gulf of Suez. On the right-hand side is the Gulf of Aqaba. And so most people would hold that the crossing took place somewhere on the northern part of that finger of the Gulf of Suez, somewhere along what we would know today as the Suez Canal. Mouth of the canal turns out to have been more prophetic than anybody knew. But I have seen people argue that the crossing was actually on the southern end of the Gulf of Aqaba. Couldn't have been much further apart than those two places. And so the reality is we have a couple good suggestions of where it could have been, but we don't know where it was. God said they crossed the Red Sea. Any part of that would have worked. It was deep enough to drown the entire Egyptian army. I always love people to go, oh, it was the Reed Sea, this marshy area way up north along the Gulf of Suez. That's a miracle. If God can drown the entire Egyptian army in 3 inches of water, that's a miracle to me. But reality was, as we see the description, it was far enough down and deep enough of an area to have water come crashing down on the entire Egyptian army. You can't move 3 inches of water down that far. So we don't know exactly where it is. And honestly, that's the wrong question too. It's not really the right question to ask. The right question to ask is usually the one we don't spend much time on, and that's the question why. That's the question people don't ask. Why did God do this? Why did he part the Red Sea? Why did he do it the way he did it described here? Why? That's the right question, and that's the question we ask infrequently. But God tells us why. Let me give you 2 verses. Verse 4 of Exodus 14. God said, I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his people, over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. God says, I'm about to do something so that the Egyptians finally can answer for themselves the question, who is the Lord of the people? I'm going to do something so that they know that I am the Lord. You get to verse 31. You skip all the way to the end. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord. Why did God do it this way? Because this is the way that God could make sure that the Egyptians answered in their own hearts and minds, who is the Lord of the people? And they could see this, and they would point at only one source, and that was God. And by the same token, the Israelites would ask the question, who is the Lord of the people? And they would point to one source, being God. God did it this way because this was the way to answer and settle once and for all who is the Lord of the people. The Hebrew people, they would believe that the Lord was the Lord. The Egyptian people, they would believe that the Lord was the Lord. And so why becomes the very important question. God told us it's so that people know that I am the Lord. You ever faced an obstacle in your life and asked yourself the question, why? Why is this here? Why am I dealing with this? And why am I dealing with this now? What did I do to deserve this? That's how we usually ask the question. As though we always have to be blamable or guilty. Why am I facing this? Why is my tire flat? Why am I getting a ticket? Why does my boss seem to hate me? Why do my kids act like reprobates? Why am I fighting with my wife? Why am I sick? Why did this person die? Why did this? Why? Sound like your life? My house, I'm trying to stop asking the question why. Why is the milk on the table? Why are the couch cushions on the floor? Because there's no really explanation for those things. But we face those issues in life that make us say, why? Why did this happen? Why did this have to happen? Why is it this way? And these questions hint at the idea that, one, we think it shouldn't be that way, and two, we think life would be better if it wasn't that way. It would be better if I wasn't sick. It would be better if my kids weren't rebellious. It would be better if fill in the blank. It would be better if my boss loved me and just showered me with money in vacation time. Right? But we face these obstacles in our life and we say, why? And the answer why is the same answer why. The Lord allows obstacles in our lives, and sometimes the Lord places obstacles in our lives to teach us that He is the Lord. So that we can finally wrestle to the mat and pin down this idea of who is the Lord of me. Because when He makes a way through an obstacle, and He does it with flash and bang and pizzazz, I'm left to conclude only that the Lord is the Lord. And it settles in my heart and mind. I'd love to say for once and for all, but at least till the next time, that the Lord is the Lord of the people. The Lord is the Lord, more importantly, of me. Is that a different perspective for your obstacles? To say that the things that happen in our life that make us tend to question why, they're there to help us see that God is God. Oh, that we would see that at the onset. I think we would see fewer obstacles if we saw those obstacles as opportunities to trust God. But even if we didn't, we wouldn't care because they're opportunities to trust God. Our whole perspective would shift simply by answering, who is the Lord of the people? That's all God wanted to answer. How many chapters have we come through in 12 weeks of God saying, you want to know who I am? You're not sure if I'm the Lord? Let me settle that one for you. Oh, that we would ourselves see the obstacles in their life, because there are many, as opportunities to say, God is God, and I am his person. I follow him. It's an opportunity for God to work. Opportunities abound, don't they? If we'd see them that way. Father, we love you. We thank you for this morning. Lord, I thank you for this particular text. The question of why that plagues our minds. It plagues our existence. Why do you do the things that you do? Why do you do them the way that you do them? Why do you allow us the pain and the suffering and the difficulties? That life would be so much better if they just weren't there. Father, would you help us to see them as you see them, as things that have been placed in our path so that we would learn to trust you. As things that have been placed in our path so that we would learn to identify you as our Lord and learn to identify ourselves as your people. Father, help us to face opportunities and see you work mightily in our behalf. Well, thank you in Jesus' good name.